All right. So why don't we, since we've lost John, why don't we go around the table and say what we see coming? So go ahead, Greg. What do you see coming over the next 2 weeks?
Next 2 weeks, I think we are going to see the momentum of change in the United States continue and ripple throughout the Western world as the powers that be are trying to come to terms with where they fit into the new world that's emerging. And I think some of the most prominent places we're going to see it is with NATO and the role that NATO is playing in the war in Ukraine and with Russia right now. So I think we're going to see some big changes next 2 weeks with that. I wrote some things down here. One of the things that I think we're going to see even more pronounced, I'm watching the unraveling of mainstream media and the narratives that were driving against the current administration retiring, stepping down. Jim Acosta just left CNN yesterday. Toxic commentators they know that this is not going to be their environment, so they're stepping away, they're resigning. Programs like The View, the rumor is they will not be renewed for the 26th season, I think, which would be coming up. They've been out there 25 years. So I think we're seeing the ripples in the media and the kind of narratives we're going to see. And I expect the next 2 weeks you're going to see that in a very pronounced way.
Wow. Yeah, I would agree. I've been watching CNN just kind of melt away like spring snow.
Well,
So,
their numbers, the people watching are so minuscule compared to most of our podcasts are getting more views than the
I know.
CNN. The only reason what's keeping CNN going is they are required to show it in United States airports. So you go through the airport and you're watching CNN, and it gives you the illusion you're seeing what the whole world is seeing, but it's just a handful of people that are actually seeing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks for that. How about you, Frank? What do you see coming next 2 weeks?
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch the way these executive orders that were signed by Trump are going to fan out into not just, the administration and the resistance to them, but how that will inspire people on both sides of the fence to act. And I think that there's always this thing called this interesting word in spirituality called phase transition, where they talk about something making a big shift very quickly to a new kind of society. And I think many people are waiting for that phase transition. And I think they started talking about it at the harmonic convergence in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
that it would happen. And then it didn't happen. And then it was going to be in 2000. And then it didn't happen. I think we all expect some kind of a phase transition. And so I would hope that in the next 2 weeks, moving forward, that we inspire those people who are psyched by these amazing changes that are being brought to the fore with these executive orders, and let's hope that some of them stick. And that there's enough of a sea change that it doesn't just become the sugar before the club. That people, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
there's too much sweetness going on here where I'm kind of going, wait a minute, like this can't, how, but maybe it can, right? But the club part of it, of course, is, on the one hand, Trump just got rid of CBDCs in America, and yet on the other hand, there is some form of everything app that was just, contracted by Elon Musk, which we know what an everything app will lead to, right? It's not,
Exactly.
it's a privatized version of a CBDC, only in the sense that, nobody's forced to use Facebook or Twitter. But the fact is, when a whole amount of people migrate to one particular application or social platform, if you're not part of it, you're losing out on that dynamic between society. So I think what they're trying to do is move these kind of scary ideas from a centralized form into a privatized, decentralized form. And I think here's our chance in the next 2 weeks and moving forward to kind of take control of that narrative and move it in the direction that many thought leaders have had for decades now.
Yeah.
I agree, Frank. I think of all of the executive orders that are being signed, we know that some of them are never going to go anywhere. The court is already challenging and putting a
Yeah.
stay on some of them, but the point is that there is enough happening that it's breaking the stranglehold that the system has had, and it's freeing up the sense that new ideas are significant, that new ideas are even welcome. And I think that's a healthy thing. I do have a concern. I think we need to stay vigilant. I do have a concern that there are new names being given to old ideas, and we're being driven toward this technocracy, no doubt. The question is, do we come in with a soft landing, or are we going to come in, with 1984? And I think that's up to us to determine that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that, well, let me say what I see and then I want to address that 1984 comment. What I see coming, and it's a worry on my part, is that there's a lot of built up anger that has accumulated in the US against the old regime. And I'm concerned that Donald Trump is going to be the target of that anger when it should have been directed at the previous administration, and it wasn't. And when people feel safe enough to get angry, then they do get angry, and I don't want that. So, maybe they just didn't think that they were safe in arguing. But I think the mandate that we've seen, how many people voted for Trump, that doesn't match up with the amount of pushback that I see happening. And so there's a lot of displaying of the pushback when I think it's really a very small amount compared to the people who are saying, go, 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 go.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I see a financial storm on the distant horizon, maybe not reaching a peak in the next 2 weeks, but coming because of a growing realization. And I think it was really, what I see is it's been triggered by DeepSeek, the AI program, that everything in America is inflated like a fat pig. And somebody's going to start poking holes in that pig balloon, and it's going to deflate. And that, everything is so expensive here. Why? It doesn't need to be. People get things done for much less. So, that's another thing I see is that political storm taking shape around inflation, deflation. And then the last thing is I see just a whole series of political earthquakes in Europe that just fracture the European Union, and similar earthquakes in Washington, D.C., among the federal employees that are being told either show up for work or retire. And that's it. Boom, boom, boom. And they have very little time to actually decide. And that kind of earthquake, I think, is happening also in Brussels, maybe Luxembourg as well, and some of the major capitals. And the countries that have been kind of quiet are starting to speak up and say, we're not going with the European Union. And you can hear, if you read between the lines, a lot of people getting ready to pull out of that union. It's like, whoa.
Well, speaking of the fat, pigs running around. Sorry for that kind of a against pig analogy, right? But nothing against pigs. But the European Union, it's so funny. They were talking about getting people to have to commit to coming to work, and this is a reality that's been happening at the European Union for decades.
Oh,
And I remember, no, I personally met with people that bragged about how they get €100,000 a year just to show up. They just have to show up and stamp their thing once a week, and then they turn around and they go home and they go back to the hotels or get the flight out of there, and they just collect the paycheck. And this is. I was shocked when I hear that, because I think that if you enter the arena of politics, you should be there for service. And the most crass example of that neglect is what took place in the Los Angeles fires. Just think if they had taken all the money that they have given all those absentee employees and built an infrastructure that was sound and solid, and probably the most technologically advanced part of the world. You could argue with Silicon Valley right there. They could build pipelines and water hydrants and I mean, just imagine. It doesn't take much to think about what they could have built with some money there that would have prevented and put the end to that fire immediately. And so this is a crass example of how degenerate that system has become. And I hope that we are in the next 2 weeks we begin to see that kind of stuff
Right.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
put it into action.
Wow.
Well, I guess we'll get to see you in 2 weeks. So we will meet again on February 14th on Valentine's Day.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
day
we'll
before my birthday.
compare notes. And
That's your
Penny, do
birthday?
you want to take us out, Penny?
Yeah, I will. So I'm just going to pretend I'm John and say this whole thing is brought to you by Transition Talks, which is located in a little town called Berkeley Springs, about 100 miles from Washington, D.C., and run by John Peterson, who has been committed to making a different world from the beginning. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Take
Thank you
care.
all. I love you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.